This right here, yeah, come on, is a pain in the butt. But, hey everyone, Chris here. Welcome back to our series on the Legend Hobby T-28 Trojan. This is a big, beautiful model, and in this video, we're covering the engine installation. And by the end of this video, we're gonna take this airplane out to the field. We're gonna be doing full taxi testing, making sure that the airplane is completely ready to fly, because this is the last step before flight. And so for the engine, I have gone with the Saito FG-60 3-cylinder radial engine. This is a 4-stroke gas engine. It's gonna sound incredible in the model. It's just like the perfect fit. It fit perfectly in the Cowl, and it's got huge power for the model. So yeah, I can't wait to get this engine on the model and just get it in those final steps, because this is it. After this, it's all about flight. And so let's get into it. There's not much left to do here, but there is gonna be some engine testing we have to do because there is a break-in process. And so yeah, with that said, let's go. Now, before we get into it, I wanna mention this video is brought to you by PCBWay. If you have any kind of maker needs, like if you got 3D printing or machining, electronics, anything of that sort that needs to be made, they have a huge list of services that they offer that are all related to that. And so if you are doing any kind of design work, they can help you realize those designs. And so be sure to check them out. I've got a link down in the description where you can check out their website, pcbway.com. And a big thank you to them for their support. This right here is a pain in the butt, but I think it's gonna work. We'll have scale exhaust, scale location. That remains to be seen though. First attempt, I'm a little nervous. All right, well, it's not drawing any fuel for whatever reason. Oh, there it goes. Shoot. Ah. Well, there goes all my fuel. Boy. Ignition battery. It's the ignition battery. All right, man. She runs. I got to run a bunch of fuel through it to break it in, but running it super fat, because that's what they recommend to start, just to help lubricate it. I don't want to overrun it. You can hear it really comes up in the RPM when it really gets on point with the mixture. So I'm gonna run a couple tanks through it before we fly it, and then yeah, I think it's gonna be awesome. It's got lots of pull, so it's gonna really fly good. Brakes lock up so fast. Dealing with some traffic. Brakes are really sticky, so I gotta deal with that. Steering's pretty sensitive, so I gotta deal with that, but otherwise, engine's running fantastic. It seems to steer like a tank otherwise, other than the sensitivity, but yeah, it sounds amazing. All right, so the engine is in. We've done some ground testing. We've done some break-in of the engine, but let's talk about the installation itself a little bit. So, you know, the first thing we needed to do was, of course, to get the engine mounted. And so the standoffs that come with the engine, that's what I ended up using, but I did add a couple of spacers to push the engine out maybe about 10 millimeters more. Just to give some additional clearance between the cowl and the prop. The other thing is, you know, you have to plot out the mounting holes, you know, and put some blind nuts on the backside. So in the kit, they provide you with, you know, a mounting template, and I just marked on there where it needed to be, so that way, you know, it lined up really well. The other thing was, when I mounted the cowl, I actually 3D printed a disc that I could put on the crankshaft of the engine, so that way I could make sure that it was perfectly centered in the cowl, and so that ended up working out pretty well. I noticed some misalignment between the canopy and the cowl, and I think I might have gotten my canopy not quite straight. So I will end up fixing that. I do plan to do some detail work after we fly the model, and so I'm going to fix that and any other areas that I might have kind of goofed up. But otherwise, using the standoffs with some spacers. And then the other thing was the fuel tank. Now, obviously it's gas, so you gotta have the right rubber stopper in there. I might have not had that initially, and it just kind of disintegrated, but that's important to keep in mind. Otherwise, you know, when you're setting up the tank, you need the clunks in the tank. I actually have two lines in there. One is to fill and unfill the tank itself, and so that's connected to my filler valve, and then the other one feeds the carburetor. And so when you rotate the tank around, you want to make sure that that clunk can, you know, move freely inside the whole tank, so that way if you go inverted and it's stuck at the bottom of the tank, you don't end up sucking air. You know, to try and maximize that as much as possible, you want to make sure that it goes all the way to the back, but also has enough play to move around inside the tank. I also wanted to mention that with respect to the engine, now I did two modifications out of the box, okay? So it has the Morris Mini Motors intake, and that was a very simple replacement part. It comes from Morris Mini Motors. They're in England, and so you take the old intake off, drop the new one in place, and tighten it all up. Now, it is kind of a process getting that from them. They only take like bank transfers and stuff. It's kind of a whole deal, but it worked out great, and the engine is very, very happy And the other thing is I used the different magnet ring. I've got the magnet ring from CH Ignitions. And so these were both modifications that came from some friends who have run these engines a whole bunch. They say it's kind of the two things that really make those engines run even happier than they already do out of the box. And it helps with the intake, especially because the #1 cylinder tends to run a little hot normally, and so that new intake helps to distribute that a little bit better. And so that the #1 cylinder doesn't run quite as hot. To get that magnet ring off though, there's a set screw in there that you gotta undo, and then you need a gear puller to pull that thing off. And so I just found one on Amazon, and I was able to get it off of there ultimately, but it just like kind of popped free. And then once that happened, I was able to pretty easily get it off with the gear puller. But otherwise, you know, once I had the engine in, we had to mount the cowl, of course. And that was all just done, you know, that you've got the cowl, you've got blind nuts and mounting tabs that come on the fuselage already. So you just got to line those up and make sure that you don't miss drill. So they show you in the instructions how to do that. But in the process, after I mounted the cowl, I plotted to make sure that you get this third gear door on the front. And so I cut that out, glued some hinges on there. And so ultimately that door is actually glued to the main door that's on the fuselage, the twin doors. And so it's glued to the right one because it's a single door on the full scale of that front door. So when those doors close, with it being glued to the front door with the balsa wood tab, it pulls it closed at the same time. You do have to make sure that your hinges are all in alignment and all of that. And also to take the cowl off, I ended up I pulled the pins out of the hinges in that forward door and replaced it with a piece of wire with an L-band at the end. And so that way I can pull that pin out and then remove the cowl without having to unglue the door. So it's kind of a pain, but it ultimately works really well. It's just taking it on and off. You gotta spend a little bit of time, but you're not gonna be taking the cowl on and off all that often. Also very important in the cowl is a baffle. I got that from CH Ignitions as well, and I just tack glued it in, and it wasn't a very perfect fit because this isn't necessarily perfectly circular. Once I had it tacked in place, I just fiberglassed it in permanently using some just Z-epoxy finishing resin. Not the right resin for that, but it worked well enough because it didn't quite wet out as easily as a different type of resin, but it's kind of what I had. But with this engine, baffling is essential. And also I dremeled out the back of these vents, the cowl flaps, for exit, air exit for the cooling. So lastly, the radial engine came with this flex tubing, and I really wanted to try and get the exhaust in the scale location. And so what I ended up doing is really just moving all of that around and bending and just trying to manipulate that flex tubing in a way to where I could route it to the cowl exit where the scale exhaust is. This right here is a pain in the butt. I routed them all to one side, and it ended up working out really great. Now, they do have some play, so we'll see how they move in flight once we get there, but otherwise, the look is great. Once I had routed them in place, I found some copper elbows that fit perfectly over the flex tube, and then I just used a 256 bolt drilled through, and then with a lock nut on the back side, ended up holding those in place with that. Because originally I was like, can I tape it or do other things? So it's like, nah, I need a positive attachment. And so the 256 bolt with the lock nut worked great. And so the look is perfect, especially like when I was doing the initial run-ups, you can see smoke coming out the exhaust. So when it's gonna be bellowing down the side of the fuselage, it's gonna look so great. I mean, those were the highlights that I can recall. Now we've got a 2-blade prop on here. I'm gonna stick with the 2-blade for the first flights. I do have a 3-blade that I wanna try, but for first flights, the 2-blade is gonna be most efficient, and it's got like the perfect prop arc. This is a 2210 2-blade propeller that's recommended for the engine, and then the 3-blade is a 2010, and so you gotta go down in diameter because of the additional blade. And so we're gonna stick with the 2-blade for now. We'll try the 3-blade later on. So yeah, I think that covers it. I think the only thing left now is we gotta take it out to the field. We gotta make sure this airplane is completely ready to fly. It hasn't run yet with the cowl on. And so we definitely need to do that. I want to make sure all the taxi, all of the response is good. And so, yeah, let's take it out to the field and see what she'll do out on the runway. All right, taxi time. I don't need no stinking starter. So it's running rich with the cowl on. Cool. All right, I need to give it a little bit left steering trim to straighten out the steering, but otherwise the engine's running good. I gotta make sure that, you know, when we do our takeoff, that it's gonna get up to peak RPM before really committing. It wasn't, I did a couple full throttle run-ups and it didn't quite clear out to full throttle, but otherwise we're gonna check the temperatures here on the cylinders with the cowl on. This is the first run with the cowl on. So, but otherwise, man, I think the airplane's ready. So I'm really excited to get this bird flying finally. It took a bit longer than anticipated, but man, the wait has been absolutely worth it. I'm so excited. The gas engine on the front, that radial engine, it is a totally different experience having the rumble, the noise, the sound. Like, it sounds just incredible with those 3 cylinders cranking. And I can't wait to hear it in the air. And so if you have been on the fence about doing gas, man, 4-stroke gas sounds amazing. And this FG-60, I think, is gonna be like the perfect match for this airframe. But otherwise, guys, if you wanna see our last video, we took care of all of the landing gear, the retracts, all that stuff. You can see that here. And also be sure to pick up my brand new book. You can get that at www.artofscalemodeling.com. It's brand new, all about painting, finishing. I'm super excited to get that to you guys. But otherwise, yeah, until next time, we'll be out of the field, flying this bird, and I can't wait. We'll see you then.